The UN investigates claims of food aid stolen in Somalia. This amid a famine that has killed tens of thousands of people and left millions displaced. What effect does food aid theft have on the humanitarian work in Somalia? And how can aid agencies tackle corruption? This is Inside Story. Welcome to the program. I'm Darine Abougaida. The UN World Food Programme is investigating the possible theft of food supplies meant for Somalia's famine victims. But it's denied reports that half of all its aid is being stolen and sold on the black market. More than 3.2 million Somalis, and that's nearly half the population, need food aid. That's after a severe drought engulfed the country. This against the backdrop of the country's long-running civil war. Zain Basravi explains.
Tens of thousands of people are starving in Somalia. For them, international aid is the difference between life and death. But there is evidence food sent to the country is being stolen from the people who need it most.
We haven't received any food from the UN agencies since we arrived, and the little food we get from the people is taken by militias and the thugs who think we are weak and vulnerable. Please help us quickly.
Famine victims are being forced to buy their own food from Somali businessmen who are stealing aid and selling it for cash. They're politically connected and have armed militias to guard stolen goods. Thousands of sacks of corn and grain meant for famine victims are winding up on store shelves. Fortified peanut butter used to feed starving children is being taken off aid trucks and sold in Mogadishu's markets. At refugee camps, families say they've been forced to give back food after journalists have taken photos of them with it. It's a cruel story of profiteering from a disaster that threatens more than 12 million lives. Theft of international aid could make donors reluctant to give food if it's not getting to those who need it. The United Nations says there has been some stealing, but it's not as extensive as it seems.
The World Food Programme has put in place strengthened and rigorous monitoring and control in Somalia. However, given the lack of access to much of the territory due to security dangers and restrictions, humanitarian supply lines remain highly vulnerable to looting, attack, and diversion by armed groups.
Stealing food aid is relatively common during humanitarian disasters. What's surprising in Somalia is the size of the operation and how open it is. It shows how difficult it can be to feed millions of starving people in one of the world's most dangerous countries. Zain Basravi, Al Jazeera.
Let's bring in our guests for the program. We have in Mogadishu Dr. Abdiqani Sheikh Omar. He's the executive director of the Somali Young Doctors Association. From Nairobi, Joachim Gundel, who's the director of Katuni Consult, and that's a consultancy focusing on humanitarian, operational, as well as political issues in Somalia. And over in London, we have Somali journalist Jamal Osman. Welcome to all of you on this edition of Inside Story. Gentlemen, a lot to talk about in the next 25 minutes or so. But first, let me just tell you what the Somali Prime Minister, Abdiweli Muhammad Ali, has been saying about this food aid theft. And he held a joint news conference with the United Nations Emergency Relief Coordinator, that's Valerie Amos, who's visiting the capital. And the Prime Minister said that we have also raised the issue of creating a special humanitarian force, which has dual purposes. And the first is to secure and protect the food aid convoy, and to protect the camps and stabilize the city and fight banditry as well as looting. So that's what the Prime Minister has said on this force that's being established. Joachim, if I can come over to you first. This food aid theft that's reportedly taken place, where is the loophole in the system? Is the WFP, the World Food Programme, to blame for this, or is it the third-party organizations that the UN works with to distribute this aid, or anyone else?
You can hardly say anybody really is to blame in that way. It's an expected situation. This has been the history of international aid to Somalia for the past 20 years. And it has been part of the problem that food aid has been diverted, stolen, manipulated in different ways. And this should have been known to the international organizations, including the WFP, and they should have prepared for the situation.
Okay, so it is a recurring situation, as you're saying, and it's not the first time that this has come up with the WFP in particular. So what does this tell us? What's lacking? What needs to be put in place to stop this?
Well, some of the organizations and distributors that are being used have already been on investigations for irregularities and for food aid diversion, etc. Some of the solutions that has been suggested is that you have to divert the transporting network. You have to divert who you're dealing with. Secondly, you have to put into structures where you're involving the community to much a larger extent in such situations. Yeah, this situation can hardly have come as a surprise. And it's not caused by the drought, it's caused by the conflict that has been ongoing for the past many, many years.
Okay, we're certainly going to get on to this in just a moment, but first, Jamal, over to you. Does the scale of this reported food theft call into question the AIDS group's ability to do their job and to reach those starving and dying in Somalia?
Interestingly, I have investigated a WFP corruption in Somalia back in 2009, where we found lots of the food aid is being diverted and sold in the open market. So it has been going on, and the UN has been saying we are investigating and trying to improve. But the problem, I think, lies inside dealings, if you like. The WFP is responsible in delivering food aid to the needy, and they are nominating contractors or businessmen who are known by the UN itself to be corrupt. And that is where the problem is. Why would you ask someone who you know is corrupt to deliver food aid? That is what the WFP is literally doing. So I think the WFP is responsible, and they know the food aid is being diverted, but they are complicit.
Okay, just one thing, Jamal, on the black market, since you mentioned it. This food that's reportedly been stolen, making its way onto the black market, being sold there. We know that there's an inflation problem in Somalia as well. So is this necessarily a bad thing that the food is ending up on the black market when it can bring the prices of food down?
I think it is a bad thing because the food aid was destined to these refugees who are affected by the drought. It was not meant to be sold by corrupt businessmen who are working with WFP officials who are themselves corrupt. So the food should be getting to the refugees rather than in the open market. And the refugees have to buy the food that they were supposed to get for free, which is sad.
Dr. Abdikhani, let me come to you now. As an aid organization that operates in Somalia, how hard is it for aid agencies to try and do their job in the country?
Yeah, as the aid agencies, they are trying their best to cover the needs. But I think the demand and the supply is so much different. If you go to the road, you find everywhere that IDPs are scattered everywhere, and the need they're getting is not so much sufficient for them. So now they become overcrowded to the roads. They are begging, and they always complain about the aid agencies, particularly WFP, because they come here. These people, they arrived from, they come from a very far distance, like Bai, Bakol, and other regions. And the way they come here is to get something that they can survive. But actually, they become fed up. Now they're saying it is better to go back home and die instead of dying here slowly without getting any support. And the main problem they are facing is really whoever is going to give them any support, particularly food, mainly the gatekeepers who are the control of the IDPs, who are the leaders of the IDPs. They are the most who get the essential thing. And so all these combined issues, they make everything very difficult to these IDPs. And
so it's a dire situation. So it's a dire situation, of course, for the Somalis that are suffering the famine and the drought, as well as the aid organizations like yourselves who are trying to do some work there. The famine and the drought in Somalia, Dr. Abdikhani, is being called a collective failure of the international community. Let me ask you this: if there is an investigation into what's going on right now with the food theft that we're discussing, and organizations are found to be guilty, then do you think that they should be banned from Somalia? For you, as an aid organization, is any help better for Somalis than no help at all?
I think if they feel that they can be punished, they can't do something like that. So the corruption is not started now, it's going on since the last 20 years. So being taken any action, I think it's not something easy for at the moment.
Okay, Joachim, we were discussing a little while ago what the Somalese Prime Minister said, and that's on the bringing in a force. Do you think that an expanded force is the answer right now?
Well, I mean, everything that we are seeing right now seems to be a repeat of 1992. They called for a draw, they called for international force to bring it in to solve the problems. And the situation at that time, as it is today, is that it is a conflict that is a problem, it is a fighting, it is failed policies towards Somalia for a very long time that has brought about this situation. The drought is just making it worse. Now, to bring in a force will require that we are very much aware of the mistakes and the failure of the force then, which actually brought about the warlords, many of the food aid contractors who made themselves very rich and very powerful in the Somali context and has been part of the problem ever since. You have research now that actually is documenting how this whole aid system has become part of a persistent war economy. So if you're not taking these factors into consideration and you're just plunging in with an external military force to create the security and provide protection for convoys, you will end up repeating the same mistakes and we will be back at square one anyhow.
Jamal, do you agree with that? Do you think that we will be repeating what happened in 1992 in Somalia with this force, should it be brought in?
I don't think you need a force, and I think the solution should be that the donors should deal with the smaller aid organizations who are much more effective and less corrupt than the big ones. I think there are well-established NGOs, whether they are local or international, who know the locals very well, who operate across Somalia, who deliver aid effectively and distribute fairly. So I think they should deal with those rather than the big ones who are known to be corrupt.
Well, gentlemen, Susan Rice, who's the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, has blamed AlShabaab for exacerbating the crisis in Somalia. Last year, the group stopped aid to areas it controls in Somalia.
The aid hasn't gone in sufficient quantities into South and Central Somalia is because AlShabaab has prevented those most capable of delivering large quantities of aid from having access.
So that's Susan Rice there. Joachim, if I can come over to you, do you agree that AlShabaab is making the situation worse, or is that just a convenient excuse?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would say that I very much agree with the previous speaker that there are options in terms of the working with different actors in distributing the food aid, and communities can be involved very much well. And you know, that's something that could have and should have been prepared for, but it wasn't. Concerning AlShabaab, yes, of course, they are to a very large extent to blame because they have been persistent in wanting to pursue a conflict, and they have not been very easy to bring into a negotiation table in solving the Somali conflict. On the other hand, the TFG is not innocent either, and the AMISOM forces is not innocent as well in terms of wanting to pursue, and over the past 6 months have been actually actively involved in a offensive in Mogadishu and along the borders towards AlShabaab, and in that sense has not been helpful in terms of trying to prevent this crisis which was looming.
Jamal, what are your thoughts on that?
I think to say that all parties of the conflict are to blame is fair, but to say AlShabaab are preventing aid reaching, I think is Ms. Rice is making a political point.
But they had banned aid groups.
No, that's not true. That's misleading. And I have been to Somalia a number of times, and I have done stories in the AlShabaab territories. I got back from it 2 weeks ago, and there are over 70 local and international aid organizations on their book, if you like. But the
they
ones
did
they
ban
banned,
the organizations such as the WFP, for example.
yes, these are the big ones, but you have UNICEF, you have WHO, you have Norwegian Refugee Council, you have Islamic Relief. There are other organizations that are operating in the Al-Shabaab territories. So I think to say they have banned aid organizations is misleading. And we have to be aware of the propaganda coming from all sides, I think. So Al-Shabaab, I don't think, have prevented it, but what they have done is to say to the WFP or UNDP and the big ones that they have fallen out with, to say, we won't let you operate in our area, you should be out of our area. And I think there is a power struggle, and there was a power struggle between Al-Shabaab and the big aid organizations. And as the previous speaker mentioned, these big aid organizations have been powerful before Al-Shabaab came into existence, and they have been running in some parts of Somalia, been in cahoots with warlords. But Al-Shabaab came in and said, this is our territory, we run this place, you should obey our orders or out. So
but there's been a power struggle, Jamal. There's been a power struggle at the expense of thousands of people that are dying and not able to get food. Do you think that Al-Shabaab cares about the famine? Before I move on to Dr. Abdiqani.
I mean, they do care, and you have to recognize, they have recognized, they have recognized the drought 8 years ago. They set up a committee to deal with the drought situation. So they recognize the drought, and they are trying to deal with it, though they have not been very effective in dealing with it. So they recognize there is an issue here, but it's who deals and who helps the Somalis. That's the question.
Okay, Dr. Abdiqani, over to you. Just wondering if you can give us your perspective and your opinion on how easy or difficult perhaps it is for aid agencies to operate in Somalia without having to deal with groups such as Al-Shabaab or other militias.
Yeah, before I say comments, I want to add the previous questions. Al-Shabaab area, I think they have banned the WFP to operate. Even their contractors, even their business areas. But I think the other aid agencies who went to the Al-Shabaab area, they only bring their ad hoc food supply, which is not sufficient as big as WFP food. But absolutely no aid from WFP, whether local NGOs or others are carrying out Al-Shabaab area. Regarding to the last point, really all NGOs, whether it's international or UN or local, they are facing a lot of obstacles on the ground. If you work in the TFG area, Al-Shabaab will call you that you support TFG. And if you work at Al-Shabaab area, the TFG will say to you, you are supporting TFG, Al-Shabaab. So all in all, I can say a lot of obstacles. Besides this, local NGOs with local authorities, with the Somali Mogadishu residents, they are even trying to do any type of help to serve, to give this new influx IDPs. You cannot imagine if you stay 1 hour outside Mogadishu, you receive a lot of people are coming. So the issue is not now where Al-Shabaab is controlling. The issue, what we are talking about now, Mogadishu become the most place where IDPs they are coming, and the access of the food is not really, I cannot say adequate. It's not. It's a lack of access to the food supply. So let's not make justification to the banning of the Al-Shabaab. We have first to support, and either WFP or other agencies, they have to start food distribution to where the access is, access and safety is going on in Mogadishu. The main problem is WFP is they are not monitoring what they give the people. They give the contractors the food and they don't go any follow up. And the contractors plus the gatekeepers, they are the most one who get the most of the food aid is going on in Mogadishu.
I understand what you're saying. Look, it's certainly a complex problem. We can blame foreign governments, we can blame the UN, we can even blame local governments, Al-Shabaab, even the media for not covering the story right from the beginning when it started. But Joachim, we touched upon this a little bit. We touched upon this a little bit in the beginning of the program. Tell us where you see the solution to lie.
Well, obviously, I mean, right now the problem is there. It has come about in the way it has done because measures has not been taken to try to deal with the situation in a different manner based on past lessons. Yeah, and I think this is something that the WFP and other aid agencies really need to take into consideration. There are agencies who are not into food aid, such as Norwegian Refugee Council, who have for a very long time actually been practicing a very low-key, low-measure, community-involved way of distributing assistance to IDPs in the Mogadishu context, including AlShabaab areas. So it hasn't been completely impossible to do that. It's very much part of the approach. But what we also have to remember is that the entire approach by the international community to this situation has contributed to a politicization of international aid, which has also led AlShabaab to see very negatively on international aid organizations and suspecting them of being part of their enemies, and that's why they have been antagonizing him and throwing them out of parts of Somalia. Yeah, the situation is also very complex. I mean, part of the arguments when AlShabaab were pushing out WFP in 2009 was that the food aid at that time were contributing to market distortions, aid dependency, and undermining the local farmers' ability to actually make a proper profit out of their own production.
Okay.
In 2010, there was a bumper harvest in South Somalia. But they were not able to profit from it. If they had profited, they might have been better able to cope with the drought situation as it came up today.
All right, gentlemen, we're coming to the end of the program, but Jamal, for you, as someone who's covered Somalia and has seen what's going on firsthand, what is it like for you to see what's going on in your country, and what should be the priority right now for the international community to put an end to the famine?
I think it's sad as a Somali to see Somalis are suffering, and they have been suffering for many years. And I think it's everybody to blame, whether they are Somalis or international. And I think the solution is the international donors who have been reluctant to give, to fund these NGOs who are operating in the AlShabaab territories to realize AlShabaab is a force to reckon with. They are controlling a huge part of Somalia, and let these aid agencies and fund them so that they can feed poor Somalis who are dying for lack of food.
Dr. Abdikhani, just final thoughts from you, please. What would be your recommendations for the international community to prevent what's going on in Somalia, and also to prevent future crises like this one?
Yeah, I said always, every day, international communities and the UN high delegates, they are coming to Mogadishu for assessment. So I say, please stop assessment. Now we are not going to do any assessment. There should be an intervention that can give survivors to these poor people who are dying every day with malnutrition or other diseases. The solution also will be combined from the TFG and all other actors to be very cooperative, because lack of coordination created a lot of mistakes from even the aid agencies. Maybe one camp receive a lot of food, another camp they don't get any food. There is due to lack of coordination. So I said all the efforts, if they will be coordinated and give chance all the agencies that can have ability to work, whether AlShabaab area or other area, it should be effective. And I can say to conclude, people are dying, and every day 2-3 children, they are dying in Mogadishu for starvation. It's not time for assessment, it's time for intervention.
All right, so we'll have to leave it there, but thank you very much. It was a fascinating discussion. My guests, Dr. Abdikhani Sheikh Omar, Joachim Gundel, and Jamal Osman, thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. And to our viewers, of course, we always welcome your comments and your suggestions. You can email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. From me and the team, goodbye for now.